All right, welcome everybody. I'm Love Coach Scott Catamas. Welcome to Straight Talk with Trish and myself and three amazing guest teachers. I'm really honored you're joining us for a really powerful conversation. We're going to be talking all about finding that balance of really being in our sovereignty, very popular word in today's culture. I'm sovereign. And how to really, what does sovereignty really mean? And the different stages of sovereignty, and that balancing personal sovereignty, personal integrity with our relationships, with our commitments, with our connections. So that's the topic. Would love to hear from you. I see we've already got about 20 people in the Zoom room with us. So welcome everybody in the Zoom room. This is going to be participatory. So we want your thoughts, your comments, questions. We might even bring a few of you on camera. But to move things forward, I am going to introduce my partner that I love doing the show with every week. This is Trish.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Happy Friday. This particular topic is so near and dear to my heart. Just, Scott and I were talking, and I'm like, I just don't understand some of the way that it all works. We're really moving into our sovereignty as individuals and in our culture and in our small little new age culture. And what I've seen is that people have used this sovereignty piece as a way to hurt others, or as a way to just like tromp around on their relationships. And I was like, I don't actually think that's what it is. I think that there's something else, that it's larger than the individual. And I had some questions. I reached out to Felipe, I reached out to Scott, and I was like, I really want to have a conversation that's really the people who are teaching sovereignty in the world. And I'd love to just be able to share this, And so I'm really excited to introduce my beloved coach and friend, Felipe Lewis, who is just an amazing human in general. I always call him up for just random conversations about God knows what is up in reality, or deconstructing it mostly. He is, I know you to really show up in the program that you run as the Remember Brotherhood. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that. And you hold a role in ISTA in some way, right? As well as you're really helping people to live in their sovereignty, in their hearts, minds, bodies, and sexuality. So, can I read your quote? Sovereignty is it's about people making better choices for themselves and each other in connection. When you embody your full yes, you can advocate it and express it wherever you go and whatever you do.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Welcome, Felipe. We're going to introduce our other two guests and then give each one of them a chance just to offer their opening thoughts. And so I'm going to put the spotlight on Kamala Devi, who's someone I have tremendous respect for. I've had the good fortune to teach with her, to work with her, to collaborate with her. And one of the things, well, I don't know if you want to mention that, but yeah, that's also something that's an honor. And Kamala Devi obviously is a tremendous teacher. She's one of the significant teachers with ISTA, but she's also a mom and a wife and has a wonderful family. I've stayed in her home. I've gotten to know her family. They're beautiful. And I really wanted to have that also because, boy, there's a whole element of being in your sovereign self and also being in tune with your family needs, with your husband needs, and especially what your child needs, who's now a teenager, a wonderful teenager, gorgeous. So welcome, Kamala Devi. Really glad to have you with us. And then our other guest tonight is, you've already heard us mention ISTA. Well, this is the founder of ISTA. This is Bruce Lyon, coming all the way from New Zealand, from one of the most gorgeous places I've ever been in my life is where Bruce lives in New Zealand. And Bruce, in many ways, you're like the grand master of teaching sovereignty through ISTA and teaching self-sourcing. So I'm really excited to have you with us. I want to give Trish credit. Trish kept saying, can we get Bruce? Can we get Bruce Lyon? So thank you, Bruce, for being with
Well, I
us.
chose all of you. I really wanted all of you. I was like, oh, these people, I want them.
Absolutely, absolutely. I do want to open it to you first, Bruce, because you shared with Trish and I something the other night, and I'd love for you to share that and anything else about kind of this topic. I'd like to start with you.
Sure. Well, first, guys, bring this together. I feel like it's a really timely, important topic, you know, and I loved looking at it from the big picture. So that's where I want to start. You know, it seems to me that the planet really is choking to death on the immature expression of adolescent sovereignty, which is in a way developmental. I mean, we're supposed to develop an authentic self, and we're supposed to emerge from, you know, the core of our own being and touch our own life. That's the beginnings of sovereignty. Supposed to go somewhere, and that maturity is what I call initiation. It actually means that you're linked the very core of each individual, their life, with the great life that we're part of. And initiation requires discipline as well as following your bliss. You know, so you're not just giving up the reins and following your own emotions and your desires and so on. You're letting the reins go into a higher power or a deeper power, which is life itself. And that same life at the core of the planet and the core of everybody is the life that's moving through the core of the individual. But that requires a deep integration of freedom and responsibility, not just, you know, in relationship and connection to others, but in connection to the earth itself. So it's interesting that the goddess on the Celtic tradition, the goddess of sovereignty, was about the earth itself, or somebody who embodied the earth, making love to the king or the queen to like give them sovereignty. So it's a balance to this idea of sovereignty being like, you know, dominion given over the earth from God, as something that the earth itself needs humans to awaken to, that it's actually coming up from the earth. And so I say, I think that the big sovereign change that we need on the planet is the shift from crust to core. So the old idea of sovereignty is like kings and queens, you know, honor the crust of the earth. But what's asked of us now is that all of those crusts are connected to the core, and the life that is the earth itself has to inform our sovereignty. So there's a, you know, beginning preamble.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Well, since we're talking about the goddess, I'm going to go to Kamala Devi next for her opening thoughts. I was going to go to Kamala Devi.
So I'm having technical difficulties. I'll log back in.
All right, and then Felipe, I'm going to put the spotlight on you then. What are your opening thoughts?
All right. Well, besides the quote that Trish most lovelily spoke, for me, this the story on sovereignty, or the story of growth around sovereignty, is a story of growth around power. It starts with self and all the ways that we are not fully put together, and trying to find a way to put ourselves together so that we can start to move powerfully for ourselves. And then we start to discover that we also have to relate to others, and they are in and of themselves their own kingdom. So we are a kingdom of ourselves, and they have a kingdom of themselves. And we have to learn to engage with all the parts that exist inside of us, so that when we move in the world and with others, we are good sovereigns. And at some level, we also want to support the people we love to be good sovereigns, because it will make them better. It will make them better as human beings, but it will also make it easier for us to engage with them in a way that's graceful. Kind of like, it's a little bit like I see we're all sovereign of our own space, of our own land, so to speak, our own kingdom. And then as we get better at managing our own kingdom, we become more powerful for ourselves. We make better choices for ourselves. And then as we as we continue to grow and it's developmental, we start to notice there are people around us and we want things from them and they want things from us. And how do we do this well? How do we engage in a good trade, so to speak, between our kingdoms in a way that supports both of us in becoming more powerful? And then we become sort of colonies of kingdoms that then move together to engage with a much bigger space and bigger space. And as we develop, we become we start to learn how we affect each other through our own choices, which is the second piece, which is making better choices for others as well as us. But the key component to this is connection. There needs to be a deep, deep connection with others so that when we make better choices in support of them, that they get that, we get that, and the result is something more graceful than the lack of connection. So that's a quick bit around my sense of what sovereignty is about.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. We're going to hear a lot more from both you and Bruce. Kamala Devi, how's your technology?
I'm back, and I want to extend Philippe's metaphor around, and it's not a metaphor, really, truly, the sovereign kingdom, queendom context in which it's used, because I feel that when there's a jurisdiction or a domain of a king or a queen, the peasants aren't considered sovereigns. Only those who are really sovereign have a direct link with, they're on high, they're connecting with source, and that power comes through on behalf, so that they can use that power on behalf of the people. It just comes through so that they can be on their high and mighty. It's like with sovereignty comes the responsibility, and it's the responsibility of taking care of, those that are dependent on, and those that are affected by and influenced by the choices that you make. And so I consider sovereign a very highly earned word. It's not just something like, my son's 14, and when he turns 18, it doesn't mean that's it, he's sovereign. It's more like the moment at which one begins to take responsibility for their influence on their environment, and then they truly earn their sovereignty. And I'll give another example of, in biology, and let's say in botany, when we look scientifically at what sovereignty is, it's often identified as an organism that can, take information in, process it, and then put information out. And so that then is considered like an individual, organism. And we all know, we've heard that aspen trees, for example, have these vast networks, and it's not one organism, but it's like a community, and it's one large organ. That's a sovereign being that communicates through, from one part of this aspen field all the way across miles to the other. And so it's not the individual tree, but it's being part of a larger ecology. And so just biologically or scientifically, sovereignty also takes into consideration, are we in communication? Are we listening to others? Are we, affecting others with our, output?
I've taken off spotlight now, so it's just going to be whoever's speaking is who we will see on camera. And I'm kind of opening it up to panel discussion a little bit. I do want to read a couple of things that have come up in the chat box. Leaf writes, the shift from Mother Earth to Lover Earth, where we are not just dependent on the earth, but we are caring for her too. And I think that kind of weaves together really what I've heard all three of you say, that with sovereignty comes responsibility. That sovereignty is not all of a sudden I'm more something, therefore I get to be more taking, but actually with the sovereignty comes the responsibility. We think about the kings, the queens, the leaders that we, as history goes by, look back fondly on, where history is written correctly, and they're the ones that cared about their people, as opposed to taking advantage of their people. And so I'm hearing that, whether it's in the big picture, as Bruce pointed out, of, all right, as sovereign beings, then our only true desire is going to become, how can I be a caregiver, a caretaker of the earth? How can I support Mother Earth? And as Felipe and Kamala Devi spoke of, as I'm hearing it, it's about our immediate world. How can I be responsible with this increased power, if you will, with this increased ability? How can I be even more responsible? That's what I'm hearing. That's my interpretation. And just love to open it up to wherever this wants to go next.
Maybe I'll just link those two worlds, because I feel like initiation is in the middle, and the way that we evolve is that we often find our boundaries and our sovereignty first, and like find our own healthy boundaries, and then we realize that we're part of a community, and we gradually learn how to give and take and find what's best for everybody. But at a certain point along the path, there is this, like the hangman of the tarot, there's not this gradual accumulation from the self first, and then your family, and then your country, and then the planet. There's the realization that actually yourself is not sourced in your individuality, that yourself is sourced in the earth itself and an awareness itself. And so therefore, now there's a big challenge to initiate yourself from an egocentric reality, which is I'm at the center with my authentic self, and here's all of my rings of influence with other people, to actually life is at the center. And I can see myself as just one piece of that life, one cell of that life, but I no longer am identified self. Now that's a massive shift. And that's the shift that the planet is like forcing upon us, coming ready or not. And so then, of course, it's not so much a question of including everybody's sovereignty in global conversation so that everybody feels heard and every sub-personality feels like they've got their pronoun correct. That actually we're facing a singularity appearing on the planet in the core of every human being, and not just human, because we're shifting from not only egocentric to world-centric, we're still human-centric, so the earth itself has to break the human mold with the life that we all are. So I just want to point out that developmental, self first and then family and country and so on, there comes a point where it all has to flip. And what becomes first is not the individual now, it's the life at the core of us all.
Boom. Beautiful. Beautiful. Kamala Devi, I think you're speaking, but you're muted.
Where this becomes really challenging is in interpersonal relationships, right? So when we're maturing, like on the path of growth, there's often messages that are, you'll get love if you behave a certain way. And so that then calcifies into, oh, I have to give a piece of myself up in exchange for love and acceptance or belonging. And then we, whether it's in a toxic relationship or just a toxic culture, there's such a repeated pattern of constantly being other than self in transaction for love, or only allowing a certain part of self, which we deem appropriate. And so part of what we see when we have these conscious relationships that are coming through is people are really reclaiming, like, oh, I want to be in an authentic relationship. I want to be totally myself. And the pendulum will try to sometimes swing. And it's like, I'm not doing anything for love to get love. I'm just going to be myself. And if you don't love me that way, then it's not meant to be. And we can have people who are claiming their autonomy, and saying, this is my sovereignty. And that's developmentally valuable, better than being a doormat or being a false self, but it's not the end of like true healthy sovereignty.
Beautifully
I want to follow up with that. What occurs to me is that I lost it. Sorry. It'll come back and
Okay.
once in a while.
Yeah, we can wrap back around. What I loved what you said, Kamala, was that, okay, so there's this like very specific piece about owning your autonomy and really taking sovereignty as a global bettering, right? Not just the individual bettering, but the global bettering. And, you know, we're taught in our societies and our cultures to be codependent, to give these things for love, to contort, to fawn, to do these things. And so finding that autonomy and practicing the ways to get into the center and to speak honestly, because we're kind of taught to lie about it, right? We're taught to be like, you know, I want your love so much, Kamala Devi, that I am willing to give up blah, 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 blah of myself to get your love and safety and whatever needs that I'm desperate to be met. So the place of owning your own impact is so crucial in moving from the autonomous place, the authentic relating place, into the sovereignty that is, you know, making the conscious choice for the betterment of self and others. And the, you know, it's like the triple win, Bruce. I'm hearing the triple win. And is it good for you, for me, and for everyone, as well as the entity that is the earth and the entity that is the universe, right? Because it's all connected. We're not separate from it. We're dissolving the consensus reality in the way that we know it, right?
So the waking up point for, you know, to break free, not just from the codependence, but from the trance, is that this kind of exchange where I'll give you your needs, I'll try to meet your needs if you can meet mine, and I'll be this way in order to get that this transaction that is almost unconscious and common is actually not love. That meeting each other's needs and transactional, like, you know, I'll give you love if, you know, that conditional practice is what the personality and the identity does to maintain, you know, its sense of self, which is actually part of the false self, because it thinks it needs something to get love, as opposed to it is love. And so the breakthrough, you know, and the real mature love is in any and all conditions, and it's not seeking or trying to give somebody what they need, because it's being it.
All right, I got it back. Thank you. Yeah, you can go. So these sort of ideals are freaking awesome, because we're humans and we're capable of imagining the ultimate. And what I find happens, and it's a kind of a darker view of the, you know, in comparison to this ultimate, which I see it as very light, the darker view is at a nervous system level. Even a lot of people, even if they can imagine what it could look like if they could reach that point, their nervous system is just not up for it. And they're kind of like, they keep trying to reach that point, and nervous system says, no, this person touched you and you're freaking out right now, and you don't have a choice around it. And so for when we speak of the world waking up, I'm like, okay, that's how much percentage of the world that can actually do that, like this much? And the rest of the world is fucking stuck in the muck of their trauma, really, really wanting to make it work and rise up to that occasion, and knowing that it's possible because they have a capacity for abstraction. But the bottom line is that their primality, their nervous system just drags them right back down into the muck.
Yeah, and I get that. And I think one of the things that's changing actually is that the matter itself is starting to vibrate in the earth. And so we have this idea of, like, even kings and queens, you have a queen or a king, you don't have them both. But inside the human being, if we can do our inner marriage so that our king and queen are both present, then we have the vibration of our matter that's coming up and helping our nervous system cope from the earth itself, at the same time as we have this awakening that's coming in awareness. And the other thing that I want to say is that it is developmental, because we all know early attempts to love aren't really love at all. It's kind of narcissism and codependence, you know, hand in hand, resulting in martyrdom and blah, blah, blah. But then that leads to having an authentic self, like the journey to find what your authentic self is, because it's very hard to love anyone unless they know who they are. But then at a certain point, you become ripe. And that's the piece that you're talking about. Enough people are ripe on the planet to make that next journey. And that next journey is not about following your authentic self no matter what. It's linking your authentic self to the life. And I think it becomes you become much more responsible, because it's very hard to love somebody if they don't know who they are. And so they're going to be presenting a different face and trying on different selves to be authentic. But if then they know what they're going to show up for. They know that they're going to show up for the why they're here. Like, that's not going to change. They may change all of the rules for, you know, like social relating, like all of the kind of rituals of relationship between people, but they're replacing them with something that's real, that you can rely on far more than you can rely on them to send you a birthday card or like, you know, follow their agreements, because they've got a much deeper agreement. They've got an agreement to life itself, and your life recognizes that. So I think part of the suffering that goes on for people is that they're at very different stages of that process, and they're trying to negotiate connections and relationship based on what they think are shared assumptions about relationship. But the truth is, many, you know, people at different stages are fundamentally relating from a different place.
And here's the trick with defining stages, right? So we agree it's this developmental path, but we need to recognize that it's not a linear one, that path is actually more of a spiral. And there's so many times when we can have these awakenings and we're like, I'm in my sovereignty and I'm like connected with the earth. And it's not just unconditional love, but life that's moving through me. And then it's like a peekaboo experience where you're like, forget and remember and forget and remember. And the forgetting sometimes, it's, you know, we get hijacked by our nervous system, or some old trigger comes up, the next layer comes up for the healing. And a lot of times when we make relationship agreements, it's from a certain high place. We do it in ceremony or ritual. And then there's another part of us that gets activated when we're at the play party, or when we're, it's like, which part of us is making those agreements? Because that, even though we are waking up, we might also have one foot in the deep, dark part of that spiral.
I so appreciate you saying that. That's absolutely right on. You know, how many times have we experienced, or someone we're close to has some amazing epiphany, you know, and I've healed my mother wound, or yes, go, I love you unconditionally, I'm practicing compersion. And then you watch your lover do whatever, and the animal body takes over. And it's like, no! Right? So I love what you're saying about the spiral. You know, it's, our evolution is not a light switch that we turn on. It is a constant journey. And as a coach, I always like to tell people, most people's progress is 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 1 step sideways, turn around a few times, and then hopefully make another step forward. So thank you for that.
Go ahead. I wanted to piggyback on that really quick.
Just a couple comments from our viewers, because I really want to engage those of you watching on Facebook and those in our Zoom room. Oliver in the Zoom room has some really great little quips here. He says, healthy surrender versus unhealthy acquiescence, commerce versus connection, and the alchemy of autonomy. So those are 3 little nuggets that he's kind of reflected. And then, since we have 3 people from ISTA here, you are wanted in Romania. Vasilia from Romania is writing, it is very difficult to find authentic spirituality today in Romania. It's almost impossible. And that's why we want to bring ISTA. And then she lets everybody know that it's the International School of Temple Arts, thank you, together with Javi Martinez, because it's the closest thing to authentic spirituality. So book now that we can start traveling again, I think the 3 of you would be a great trio to go to Romania. Okay.
But
Take it away,
I'm
Philippe.
I'm not quite at the point where I can teach, but I organize, so this is actually pretty good.
All right.
So yeah, we can connect and talk more about that. So what I wanted to share, to piggyback on what Kamala Devi said, is that there's a trajectory to growth, even if it's 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, 1 step sideways, and a little whip to do in the middle. There is a trajectory. There's a developmental trajectory. There's a trajectory that's self-authored at some level, because the more we get to know our own self, the more we can use that as a reference point for what we become, and we actually start noticing others also as reference points. So then when we do grow, we're like, oh, I'm a little closer to this person, a little further away from this person, is a sort of multidimensional, energetic soul trajectory that we're on together with others, sometimes more closely to some others than others. And I think we can trust that. We can trust in the fact that as we get to know more, as we do our shadow integration, as we become more aware, as we become more secure and more mature and wiser overall, that things are moving in a direction along with others and in our communities and our tribe and the world in general. We can. It's freakishly slow. It's glacially slow sometimes, but it's accelerating, and we can see it happening. And it allows us to say, yeah, we're moving in a direction and we're stepping up to the plate. Otherwise, how would we know? And I think what I want to say with that, and that's been a recent realization in my relating to my girlfriend Kaine, is that we can trust even in the shadows. The shadows are, if it's just the things we haven't learned yet and we're about to learn and it's about to become uncovered so we can do something about it, then we can trust that. We can trust when it gets messy, because there's something on the other side of it, because we can trust in the trajectory of it.
Beautiful. Leaf writes, while these ups and downs can be humbling, I think there's a wonderful reason we don't remain static. It's freedom. If we just evolved to a certain point of change and then remained the same, we would be like machines. We get to stay alive, free, dynamic, and on our toes continually. It's a beautiful comment.
In consideration of Leaf's comment, I want to encourage that when we are talking about interpersonal relationships, that all of our agreements be for now. In other words, whatever we're deciding, okay, this is what my nervous system's ready for, this is what we're going to try or stretch into, let's always consider it as we're growing, changing, let's check back in. This isn't, till death do you part.
Mm-hmm. Yes. That agreements can always be renegotiated. Go ahead, Bruce.
What Nick was saying about freedom is that it feels like this freedom also needs to be redefined, like sovereignty. And mostly adolescent expression of freedom is that the freedom for the self, but there's a deeper freedom, and that's the freedom from the self. And I think that this is really important when it comes to sovereignty, because we're still modeling sovereignty on the idea that there is a single president of Bruce or of Scott. Am I talking to the president-elect of Scott? And so we have this kind of idea that there's a there's a single person at the center of this, whereas I would see myself much more as a council of selves, and I'm the empty center in the middle. And the spiral that Kamala Devi was talking about is because if my little human self's the president, then I'll say, sure, I'm able to engage. And yeah, sure, let's have an open relationship. But have I even asked my friggin' animal? Like, have I talked to everybody in my council? Because sure enough, they're going to come up and their voices are going to be loud later. So I feel like part of sovereignty has to be redefined, just like the earth. Like, have we talked to the whale about the ocean? Have we forest? Do we know that this whole earth is a living, vibrating being? And the same with me. Like, the truth is, for me, my soul is beautiful into freedom, but I've got quite a possessive animal. So if I move too fast into open relating or whatever, my animal is really pissed. It starts to roar, and pound its hooves on the ground, So it's not buying my sovereignty of my human self saying what's true for it. It wants its own voice. So, I think part of the recognition that you have a council and that you have to consult the whole living being that you are, just like we need to consult the whole earth. And this stupid idea that we're going to elect one person and 300 million people to make decisions for us all, that's just so gone now.
Bruce, that's epic and fucking awesome. Thank you. What I love about that is that you shared that there's a lot going on within each of us. Our subpersonalities, we've got the childhood stuff, we got all these little like whispers. I mean, my mom's somewhere in here, right? She talks to me all the time. It usually comes out with, okay, Trisha. Like, you always know it's my mom when it comes out like that. And then there's the whole body piece. And this whole thing, wow. Like, it talks in so many different ways that, sometimes I'm like, I gotta slow down. But we've severed the head from the body. We've severed the brain from the body, and then the spirit from all of that. So, and then with each other, right? We've separated each other so deeply that now we're not thinking about the impact in here as well as the impact in here and the impact in here. And I love that you were like, yeah, we got to bring it all in. We have to like sit down, be present, get quiet, and like really check in. I love that you have a possessive human animal
that stomps on the ground. Yeah.
Me too.
And all of us, and it is so important, especially for those people that are wanting to be as open-minded as possible, to recognize our primal self, our jealous self. It's so interesting. I did 2 sessions just before this group tonight, and both people I was working with, we were talking about getting in touch with the different parts of ourselves and having them talk to each other and integrating and recognizing these beautiful parts of ourselves. And we judge certain parts of ourselves. I should be more compersive. I should be more this. God forbid my jealousy. Hey, it's all there. It's all part of this rainbow of human experiences. And it's all about learning how to honor, using Bruce's example of the council, learning to honor every child, every member of the family at the table. And no one member of the family is more important than another.
So while we're redefining self, but redefining freedom or autonomy, I've recently come to this very synthetic idea of what the self is. Because, as a yogini, it was formally taught, like, there's the high self, the true self, that's the self, like not this and not the ego and not that. And so I'm standing in this place looking at this council and it's that the self is actually the sum total of all the parts, that does include the earth-centric self as well as, the greedy self but it's the sum total. And then that takes into accountability where we are developmentally, because what's it all add up to? Sometimes we fall in love with somebody and it's one part of themselves, but we can't accept their shadow or what they trigger in us. And it's like, we want to fall in love with the sum total of who that person is, as well as from the sum total of who we are.
Beautifully stated.
Scott has always taught me. Go ahead.
Just want to come back for a moment to that animal self, because I feel like apart from masculine and feminine, we're also struggling on the planet to decolonize ourselves. And a lot of the decolonization comes, I think, when we realize that our animal is the way that our animal is. So like my animal is a possessive animal, right? So I can't try to convince it that it should be a bonobo or that it should be a possum or something, because it's not, So what's far more useful is to use what it is And, you know, the way I've come to use that is use that possessiveness in my animal to hold to a level of purity, or to a defense against something, instead of like just barking at every you know, man that comes along. Like, find where that possessiveness can be used for the kingdom, and it can be used in a deep way of holding to a place of integrity and purity. You know, so whatever you are, you have to get to know yourself. You have to get to know all of those parts of yourself. And instead of trying to train them towards some ideal of what they should be because of the culture that we're living in, we all should be monogamous or whatever, to truly, you know, create a life that works for you. And then you're able to integrate with somebody else and with others, because you know yourself and you can stand up for yourself and let those parts stand up for themselves, and they don't have to be like everybody else's. You can have the same life at your core, but you don't have to be the same. We can all be radically, authentically different.
Beautiful. I'm going to turn it over to Trish in a moment for who wants to direct, but I just want to read a couple more comments. Our friend Leif Hansen writes, there's a fascinating new book called Your Symphony of Selves by James Feldman, challenging that idea that we have a single self. Olivier Oliver writes, the user illusion, when I am not, everything is. That's deep. And then Elizabeth writes, there's an idea that we have to overcome our vasanas, our negative tendencies, but I believe we need to roll out the red carpet for them and welcome them as our children. It's all about integration, which is, I think, what you just were saying. And then Selena writes, self is illusion. It's not even the collection. And Trish writes, oh, this is so good. Those parts. So, and finally, by Vasily in Romania says, I am now waiting for all of you to come to Transylvania. So there you have it. Ista is on its way to Transylvania. All right, Trish, I'm putting the spotlight on you.
Okay, so I know Felipe's work a good bit. I'm not going to say that I know it exactly, but what I love about your work specifically, and this is where I'm going to go around the long way for you all, is that there's a way to integrate the chatter and the self and the person with the body. And there's, you know, there's somatic tools, there's so many tools out there for this work to be done, so that you're not just at the whim of your animal, or the whim of your thoughts, or the whim of, you know, someone else's thoughts, or culture or society or gender roles, or whatever it could be that you're participating in at this moment. And my question to you all is really, how do we live? How do we integrate? How do we move towards this idea of true sovereignty that's more inclusive than self? Like, how do we actually ground into that as practice? I like action steps.
All right, who wants to tackle the action steps for that? So you're wanting to support a member of your family or a loved one to be sovereign, and you're concerned about needs and values that you have are being challenged or threatened or not going to be met. What are some tools? What are some ways to manage that balance?
Like right now, there's this place in me that someone will comment about my physical appearance. And generally, like, I used to say thank you, but now I'm like, yeah, you're right. I totally fit into the social construct of what beauty is supposed to be. Good job. Woo. But there's something else there, right? That's I want to connect on a deeper level, on a more, we'll call it human level. Or sometimes, maybe there's times where we sit in meditation with the earth. How does the earth, like, how does it move? Not like trying to make it up as how I feel, but like compassionate meditative approaches is kind of where I was thinking. I was like, well, how do I sit in, how do I fathom what it's like for Bruce? How do I fathom what it's like for Felipe, and to raise a child in a sovereign way? How do I fathom what it's like to be more expansive than my, I call it the pie, the personality, identity, and ego. How do I become more expansive than that?
Well, I have kind of a very radical approach to this, which is probably going to be very different from others, but I just want to name it. And that is, I feel like I help people to know that it's okay to not exist.
Yes.
So I feel like my granddaughter, for example, like, she's cutting herself and she's like struggling with a teenage identity. And of course, that time of teenagers is when everybody is trying to like find a self that's socially acceptable and that fits in. And I feel like we've become so addicted to this idea of a self that we're busy trying to create it and then defend it and then promote it to others and then to have a Facebook page for it. But all of that's curled around emptiness. And I feel like what's often behind deep suicide and dark night of the soul and so on is the realization that whatever entity you've created for yourself, whatever self with whatever boundaries you've created is curled around nothing. And it's okay to be nothing. Like it's actually okay to not exist, to have emptiness at your core and relax into that. And if you can relax into that, then you can wear clothes of identity, you can dress them up, but you're not going to take them seriously because you know what lives at the core. And I feel like this fear of death, of not existing, is just like vibrating at the core of people and the generations to come, like the younger ones, like they're sitting right in that. They don't want to like dress themselves up and be someone. They want to be okay about being no one.
I love that so much. You know what I said to Scott when we had our initial conversation? We got off the phone and I was like, just kill me, Bruce. So I said to him, we both giggled about it. I was like, I'm done. I'm ready to go. Yeah. Awesome. Who else? What else you got?
Well, what I was resonating with most as we were, sharing these various aspects of self, and then how do we engage, in the world responsibly from the sum of who we are. It has so much to do with, knowing yourself and being that in the world. And I mean the big self, which is all those parts, including the empty center that the council of all those parts sits around. But when you ask, how do I know what it's like to raise a child, or it's like we can only actually empathize with others, to the degree that we know ourselves. If we don't know ourselves and we're trying to understand others, it's like, good luck. You're gonna, it's that piece about self-love is, it's not the small self and it's not the small love, but really practicing the inquiry. And the more time we spend with that dual gaze of what's inside, then we understand, what we're seeing. We can only really make sense of reality from making sense of this internal universe as well.
If you don't mind, I want to ask you kind of a personal question, Kamala Devi, and that is, you've got a teenage son who, of course, because he's a teenager, it's all about discovering autonomy, freedom of choice, independence, how far he can go. So how do you manage the part of you that wants to support his sovereignty, his autonomy, and the part of you that, as Mama Bear, needs to make sure he's safe? How do you manage that?
Yeah, so I actually am embarrassed to say how incredibly blessed and easy my son is. He does not challenge me. I'll be like, let's go, like, if you want to smoke a joint, I'll smoke it with you. If we want to explore whatever, he's like, Mom, like, like, I think probably because Michael and I are so radical, there's part of him that's not. But your question really deeply does apply to my husband of 20 years or other beloveds, where there is a mama bear that is protective, and it is this, at the core of this conversation, there's the self and the other. Like, where do I end and where do they begin? And even if I take a vow to wanting to see for their full expression, sometimes their full expression hurts like hell. And that process is a constant negotiation. It's a constant conversation. And, you know, it is different with children because they are extensions of us and we have to, you know, put up more guardrails. But he's only 14, so I haven't gotten to the real dangerous deep waters with him yet.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to read a couple more comments. And they're both kind of going back to what Bruce is referencing. Ella in our Zoom room writes, what if the point isn't to be expansive? And what if the point is just to see what is and to be? Because in being, we're already always incrementally changing and expanding. And then Leaf has something that's, talk about controversial, this is going to be interesting. He writes, yes, when a local teen committed suicide, it led many of us to a conclusion that the urge to suicide, notice I'm sure he's saying the urge, not the act, the urge to suicide may actually be a healthy but misunderstood urge, a desire to die to a self that is no longer working, serving us in the world. And youth totally get how fucked up the current world culture often is. Sadly, without the support for rites of passage, imitation, then a death for youth and adults don't see this and think they need to literally end their lives. So that's a very profound thought, which I can understand. Anybody want to comment on it?
Actually, I wanted to go back to what Trish said earlier.
Okay.
And it's to piggyback on what Bruce said around cutting. I know somebody in my life who she cuts herself. And initially it didn't make sense to me. And what it took for me for it to make sense at a deep level was to be with her, was to deeply commune it, as it turns out, with our animal, who was just in deep pain because of the connection to self. And as it turns out, the cutting was a way to dissociate from the self, from the personality, so that she could be in a place that's quiet and safe. And so what I've learned, and that's to answer the question that Trish asked, is, you know, what's the next step? How do we do this with loved ones who often do things that don't make sense? And although I'm always happy to try to make sense of the mystery and of how people function, I more often than not, take the approach that's more somatic. And for me, it comes down to moving together with them so that I know what it's like to be who they are, in a way, in a very, very small way. And I could be primally or emotionally, it's like my emotional body moves with their emotional body, or my primal body moves with their primal body. And in so doing, I get to learn something about me in the process as I interact with them. And I think that's this kind of communion and connection is one of the most profound things we can do with someone that otherwise we don't understand or doesn't understand us. And I really feel like that love is an expression of that, is an expression of wanting to deeply commune with another, or our own inner council, that all the parts of our inner council, so that we start to move together more gracefully. And out of that comes the sort of this suggestion, hey, have you tried this? Or here, I can, you know, I want to go in this direction with you, you know, do you want to come with me? And it has to be deeply consensual, and the consent comes through the connection and the trust that arises naturally from that.
So thank you. Joking aside, I think that's why I offered to smoke a joint with my son. You know, it's like, if you want to go to those places, I want to go with you. But it's beautiful, Felipe. Thank you.
Yeah, that's really beautiful.
Yeah, I'm really feeling your superpower in that transmission, Philippe. And I also just want to refer back to what Leif was saying. I think that there is a big illusion that we still have, that the inner world and the outer world are separate. So we can all see that, you know, that we're going through this mass extinction and the environment suffering, but we somehow think that our inner life is separate from that. But what if our inner life is actually part of this great life? And so what if the mental health issues and the suicide and everything else is part of the emergence of something that's happening on the outside, but it's also happening on the inside? And the Greeks were really smart. They had this god called Thanatos, which was the death wish to go with Eros. And I think sometimes we work so hard in Istria and other places to integrate Eros so that we have enough life force to counter what's coming, which is Thanatos in a big way for the planet. Our fear of death is going to be met with this coming of death that we're projecting all around us onto the species that we live with, but is also coming inside us. And so that arrival of the death wish inside human beings is a piece that's often missed as we try to get everybody back to normal mental health, normal functioning of a dysfunctional self in a very dysfunctional matrix. So what is arriving on the inside, and a lot of the depressions and a lot of the darkness that's emerging in people is not separate from everything that's happening around us. And I think we're going to have to be much more efficient at learning how to deal with that death wish as it arises in people.
That was, it was deep, really deep. I'd love to hear just a little bit more, since we've got 3 people from ISTA here and we're all familiar with ISTA, a little bit about that relationship between Eros and the death god. How do you work with that? How do you play with that? This would be for either Bruce or for Kamala Devi.
Well, if you clarify the question, I'm not resonating with it. It's you want us to speak to Eros in relation
what I
to death?
what I heard Bruce say is that in ISTA, there's a lot of focus on cultivating Eros in recognition, these are my words, my understanding, not his words, in recognition that death is coming and that the void, the death is there, it's out there. And so the cultivation of Eros, the cultivation of pleasure is, and this again is my understanding, my word, almost like the opposite or the antidote to the fear of death or the fear of annihilation, right? Is that, am I understanding you accurately there, Bruce?
Yeah, what I would say probably is that actually, if you look at the way ISTA is structured, is that the level 1 is designed to really activate and integrate emotions and Eros so that you have enough life force in your being and your body, enough self-confidence to face what's at the core of level 2, which is death and initiation. So, you know, just in the old days, people used to have to rev themselves up to go into battle. There is a ripening of the self that needs, you need to have life force moving through you, just like a fruit to become ripe in order to face the things that need to die. And as a culture, we're still a long way from that death. So it's happening here and there in pockets as people go through it. But I believe we're going to go through it en masse now. And so we're having to help people go through that heartbreaking facing of their own death and potentially the death of humans, you know, because the polyamor, you know, technology will save us, everything is okay, is kind of part of the immaturity of not being willing to deeply face the core of our own mortality as a species. So yeah, get enough life force moving, get enough joy and pleasure and orgasmic bliss in your being so that you can look down the barrel of the void and death and emptiness and actually change. Like change is something that's deeply asked of us. We have to metamorphosis now. We have to change from caterpillar to butterfly. That's a death as well as a rebirth. And a lot of people just want to skip the death part. You know, let's just go straight to having a, you know, a happy rebirth. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. So Eros helps us face death.
Beautiful.
also Eros is, the more intimate we become with the life force energy, like as we cultivate that and allow it to move as our teacher, we realize more and more that it's not the opposite of death, that it's one and the same, that there is a dying into the orgasm, not just the wordplay that is the little death, the petite mort, but also, in the cycles of our womb, every time we shed off, the lining of our uterus, like that's a death. There's a death. The closer we get and the more intimate we get to our fluids, we're like, we've got, millions of seed dying or being born in those moments. Like the death is deeply connected to life and life to death, and they're inseparable. And it's just this, I think it's Alan Watts that talks about like life is just an interruption between deaths.
Mm. All right. There are a couple more comments. Will writes that his mother did the same thing with him, Kamala Devi, smoked pot on his 16th birthday. And Selena says yes to facing death. And Steve, who's on Facebook, writes, the way we transmit to others or receive from others tends to be modeled behavior. I don't listen much, but I watch and I try to pay attention. I do in front of my children the behaviors that I want for them to promulgate. So thank you for that. And we are kind of in the home stretch here, but love to open it up to any, Philippe.
Yeah, I often tell people that being a parent is one of the most transpersonal experiences of my life. And that's before I got to do level 2 with ISTA. And by that, I mean that, once I became a father, I realized that everything that I did or say or do might or could have an impact on my son. And so suddenly, from a time where I didn't have to consider anybody else who's my flesh and blood, suddenly now it's in front of me. And that gave me a much deeper connection, not just to everything that sits ostensibly outside of me, but another human. And I feel that growing into the aliveness of life. And it's not something that I can refuse anymore. It's something that I have to give into. And in that sense, I feel like I lose myself as I become more connected to him and to the people I love.
Beautiful.
Yeah, I feel like I was like, yeah, I just like to bring the piece that probably motivated this in the first place, which is the interrelational piece. Like, how is it in relationships with others when they're using this term sovereignty? And I feel like I need to apologize a little bit for all of the self-empowerment work that's led to people using the next terminology like void or life current or ecstatic current as an excuse for really just following their own desires and their emotion, because the ego can use anything, and sovereignty and life and so on just becomes the new thing that the ego uses to justify its bad behavior. So, it's kind of Rust never sleeps. It's always going to use whatever. But I do want to say that I think that sovereignty and life and emptiness and void and truly listening to the core actually makes somebody a much more responsible human being in their relating and in their bigger relating on the planet. And our shamanic self and our heart can feel through all of the rhetoric to feel the trust. And it is true that someone who's following life may break a lot of agreements, but they're not broken as a kind of indulgence or as a way of being pre-personal. They're only broken if something more important is arising. And that more important thing is the thing that's more important to us all, which is life. And that life is asking of us so much more. So yeah, I wanna emphasize that following the void or following your life or following the core is something that requires a deep discipline and a deep sense of responsibility, not just a justification to do whatever you want in relationship.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this, to a large degree, this tonight was inspired because both Trish and I have multiple friends that are suffering in relationship because one partner decided I'm sovereign and all agreements are off, all bets are off. And just want to say, as a coach, and all five of us are coaches, on the one hand, I love what Kamala Devi said. Yes, any agreement we make is subject to change, but let's talk about it and co-create that change, not just have one person decide I've changed our agreement because now I'm sovereign. You know, that's bullshit. You know, it really is. It's not cool. So that's kind of what started this, like, hey, the whole sovereign thing. And then I love, again, I just want to go back to the word that Bruce brought. There's like that adolescent stage, you know, and we've all been there when we're in an adolescent stage of something where we find something new and we get excited and we try it on and we're not balancing it with responsibility. We're just kind of fully indulging, if you will, which tends to be kind of an adolescent stage of development with just about anything in our life. Read a couple more things. Leaf writes, such tricky territory the weenus can be. Absolutely. Ellie writes, sovereign responsibility. Absolutely. Trish writes, negotiate reality together. And somebody else wanted to say it anonymously, wrote, to more fully live, we got to die before we die. It's a Sufi saying. So, all right, I'm going to ask each panelist to share a closing thought, and then I'm going to go to your website and let people know, because each of these people that you're seeing tonight are amazing coaches, and they all have incredible offerings. So, Philippe, would you be willing to go first?
Just to follow up what I was just saying is that I think to be sovereign is at some level to die, is to give ourselves to the greater cause, like Bruce was saying, to give ourselves in sacrifice to what really matters most. And when we're just beginning this journey, what matters most to us is the self. And as we grow, what matters most grows, and becomes more diverse and becomes more all-encompassing. So to be able to see that death comes as a necessary, at least to me, progress towards sovereignty has been very useful. I become a better king, so to speak, when I allow all of myself to speak to each other and also consider all of the other selves as if they were mine.
And can you give a practical example of how you do that?
Yeah, I mean, what I was saying earlier is I learned to move with the people I love, so that it's like I take in a little piece of who they are as I share a little piece of who I am. And so who we are becomes a little bit less separate. And as it becomes a little bit less separate, it's not just who I am and who are you, is who we are. It's more of who we are. So as the we grows and develops, the self is no longer quite as needed.
Beautiful. I'm going to Philippe's website, and it's exquisite.love/classes. So tell us a little bit about what your current offerings are.
It's a constant evolution. By dark love, I mean that who we are is quintessentially messy as humans, and that we can try to apply as many structures as we want on top of it, but we have to contend with who we are in a messy way. And the process of learning that is the process of becoming more sovereign, which is to learn to make better choices for self and others in connection, as Trish said earlier. And this looks like a lot of work around consent and what is your yes and what is your maybe and what is your no. There's stages, and I try to engage with people at different stages, including the different bodies that at some level inhabit us, our inner animal or emotional body, our intellectual body or somatic body, and kind of from different angles bringing the diversity and the messiness of that results of who we are into something that makes sense, that you can have a handle on and can say, okay, now I want to get to know my inner animal a little bit better now, or I want to get to know my emotional body a little bit better. And the work that I'm doing with ISTA, organizing ISTA trainings, is very much in line with that, very much in line with developing ourselves as sovereign humans.
Beautiful. Are you doing private coaching these days? Are you available?
I am. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just you go on the website and click the button for a discovery session, and then we talk and meld a little bit at the edges and see if that's a good match, if we can do this together.
So people can dance with Philippe. All right.
And he's a really amazing coach. Just saying.
Hmm.
I worked with him for like a year. He's really, yes, you changed my life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, going to our next amazing coach, Kamala Devi, what are kind of your final thoughts for tonight? And then we'll take a look at what your offerings are.
So for those who are navigating, relating, and wanting to, upgrade how they do agreements so that it's not, so that it's honoring, like of, okay, if I'm going to, wherever I am in my evolution of sovereignty, if I want to be making agreements that are in consideration of others and self, I encourage, instead of thinking about this a transactional, this is what you need to do and I need to do to, keep our love, but to make agreements from love to love. It's like, this is what love does through me. And this is what love gives to my partner as well. And it's really this kind of upgrade so that the we, it's not like I'm committed to you. It's like we're committed to love together. And so when we're creating a relationship, it's from this to something that's bigger than the two of us. It's something that's that we can die to, that we can give all of ourselves to. It's not just each other's small self.
Beautiful, beautiful. And what's a tool for doing that? As my dogs bark. What's a tool for doing that, Kamala Devi?
So I highly recommend the agreement fields come from your own sense of what's my red lights, this is what I can't handle, what's my yellow lights of, okay, maybe this is interesting, let's stretch into that. And what's my green lights of like, yes, I want this for you, I want this for us. And once one does that autonomous work and your partner does that as well, then you can come into a dance and kind of ooh, where do we overlap? So we're really in alignment and we can honor, bringing out the best in each other. That's the tool, is the stoplight of consent.
Beautiful. It's so good to have you, everybody, on this thing. I'm going to a wonderful part of Kamala Devi's website, which is called freebies. Look at
Everybody loves freebies.
there's some really cool freebies you're giving away there. The Polyamory Roadmap, Tantra Terms ebook, Ejaculation Control ebook, and this is all at kamaladevi.com. So definitely people, sign up, get on the email list, get her free gifts. I know you also do amazing.
Would you just scroll down for a minute? Because I want to show that I have, beyond that, I have other free videos.
Oh my God.
Yeah, including ones that Bruce and I did a great talk. And so I just, whether or not we work together in the future, I've got other tools for you here.
Beautiful. My God, there's so much here. Wow. Wow. Well, thank you for giving so much away, so much of your wisdom. I do know that you offer amazing classes. Anything you want to let people know about?
I love working particularly with mentors, healers, teachers. And so especially if you're in love, sex, relationship, and you want to do a deep dive, I've got a year-long program, and that enrollment window is coming up this summer solstice. So if that is you, let's get in touch.
Beautiful. That's highly recommended. Highly recommended. All right, Bruce. Hey, what a joy to have you with us, Bruce, and to hear your wisdom. And what are some of your final thoughts?
Well, I would just say that relax, because the singularity is coming to dom you, and by that I mean the singularity is not just when robots get ready. The singularity is life itself. That evolution, human evolution, has got to a point where that life is emergent, and it's coming through the core of the human heart. It's coming through the core of nature. It's coming, and it's coming to accept our surrender. And so that part you can relax. But the encouragement, for me is what would it be like if you got into Bitcoin, 5 years ago or whatever, that if you're an early adopter, you get massive gains. And so those beings that want the extreme sport on the planet at the moment, which is to surrender to that singularity, to that life. When you're tired of your own life and making your life a better life, and you want to give yourself to something, to life itself, to use you as it will, then you get all that benefit of being an early adopter, of it runs through you and transforms your world and makes your contribution to others. So yeah, my encouragement is for those who want to be an early adopter, because sooner or later that initiation is coming for all of us. And I think that's what might help those people that are excited about going through that doorway to do that as efficiently and painlessly as possible.
So just like I've asked everybody for a tip, what's a tip? You talked about how this is coming and it's going to dom us. So how do we authentically surrender? How do we really authentically surrender when our ego is terrified, scared shitless?
Yeah. Well, trying to surrender is kind of like the last jumping off place, because it's still trying to do something, right? It's still trying to like, okay, I get it. I have to surrender. How do I surrender? And then we get busy trying to surrender. And I think actually when you relax, you disappear. When you totally deeply relax, you find out that you don't exist. So surrender is not something else for the self to do. It's what happens when the self ceases to exist. And that's a relaxation, that's a letting go. And it's there at the core of everyone. So my recognition is, or my advice really to people is get on your knees more. Get on your knees to that is at the core of you, instead of standing up and trying to do something.
I didn't get a specific from you, Bruce, so I am going to the International School of Temple Arts website. And is there any particular place that you direct me, Bruce, for somebody new who's interested in ISTA and all that you offer? Any particular place you'd suggest that they go to take a look at on the website here?
No, in fact, I must say my journey with this, I'm more on the Wisdom Council these days, and so I'm not really up to date with the latest, website. However, I do feel for anybody who's really looking to deepen their authentic expression, is a really good place. And my work is with places like HIGHDEN and temples landing around the world. My work is to find those people who really want that deep initiatory journey and help them find each other and go through it so that they can be living embodiments of a new culture that's coming. So anyone who's interested in that can find that through ISTA or through HIGHDEN Temple or through my website.
Right. And HIGHDEN Temple, for everybody's
I just sent you the link, Scott, if you want to just click on that real fast. It's a gorgeous manor in New Zealand.
Oh, great. Thank you for finding that. And I just clicked on it. Here it is. Oops. Wow. Yeah,
This is kind of like Harry Potter meets the X-Men, and in a mature kind of dive into death. So this is our way of like creating a space that's magic, where magic that is all around us, that's trying to break through human beings. We create a container for 6-week dives into that magic. So if somewhere inside you, you've got a magic wand that's trying to emerge, then this is a good place to come.
it is. And so anybody who wants to know, it's at HIGHDENTemple.org. So it's HIGHDEN temple, TEMPLE.org. And actually, I know that watching us tonight has been a friend of mine who spent 6 weeks with you earlier this year and absolutely loved it there. So she knows who she is, saying hello to her. Trish, how'd it go for you tonight?
I'm delighted. To be honest, I'm just like gonna let it sit and work my brain a little bit. These are the kind of conversations that I really love to have, and it makes my animal go and like wiggle, and yeah. This whole, like, the conversation really sits in my being like this meditation that I love from Ram Dass, who takes you through this 20 minutes where he just dissolves your entire being, and you just float off with everyone else, or well, nothing else. And he says something in there that just really, like, it's really woven into my heart and in my practices and my work, is Tatvamasi, which is I am that too. And it's just remembering that I am not this skin or this pie, this personality identity, that I'm truly connected to all that is. It's just the separation that I create. So it kind of landed in my body in the way that I've listened to this meditation like a zillion times, especially through PTSD triggers and my work with Felipe. There was just a lot of moments where I needed to dissolve consensus reality because I was participating in these ways that just wasn't loving to anyone, including this being and you and them. And yeah, I'm just really appreciating your time and your energy and your attention, the panel, and your work in the world, Scott, as well. The compassion work, the empathy work has really also helped me dissolve a lot of just a lot of what we're walking into without consciously choosing. And that's, for me, sovereignty has been the conscious choice. Like, I can sit here in my body and check in and be like, you know what, I'm in this connection, in this space with all these beings, and I can communicate effectively the transitions and the movements that I'm making. Like, I don't have to be like, I'm out. I can be like, whoa, something's happening. It feels like cheese grater. It's confusing. I'm going to try to walk it out with you, but I might need some space, a whole lot of dance, and a whole lot of probably some embodied like awesomeness. You can play along or you can get out of my way, but I love you, and let's, be empathetic and compassionate with each other. So I really want to thank each of you for your time and your energy this evening. And I know that you are powerful, beautiful teachers, and I am so grateful. Thank you.
And I want to just say, Trish is also a powerful and beautiful teacher, and you can learn more about her by going to embodied-happiness.com. The path to radical self-acceptance starts with Trish, and she's a wonderful coach, highly recommended. So again, it's embodied-happiness.com.
Well, that is the truth of love, I think. Like, my version of love looks like the radical acceptance of what is. That is what it looks like for me now.
Absolutely. Well, I have a couple little closing thoughts. Again, thank you. What an amazing group of people. And each one of you I learned from, and I'm grateful that you're in our world and that you're in my world. So thank you. Throughout the conversation today, I was reminded of one of my favorite quotes from Marshall Rosenberg, which was, which is that the greatest joy in life is contributing to the well-being of others. And I really believe that to be true. And if we're lucky, we've learned that. If we're fortunate, we are in that awareness of how beautiful, how good it feels to contribute, whether it's to the earth or to our community or to our family or to our friends. And we've discovered that this ultimate sovereignty is collapsing into just being of service, not as a martyr, not as a should, not as see how wonderful I am because I'm martyring myself to make you happy, but the genuine joy that comes with contributing to the well-being of others. So thank you, Marshall, for that teaching. And thank you, everybody, for what you shared. And I want to let people know about a couple of upcoming, every weekend, I do 3 shows. I host and produce Straight Talk with Trish on Friday nights. And then tomorrow night, we've got a really beautiful Saturday Night Alive for the Global Peace Tribe. Kamala Devi's been on that show a couple times. And tomorrow, it's all about raising consciousness, disclosure, and defending the sacred. We're going to be hearing from Winona LaDuke, who is organizing protests that are beginning this weekend to stop the Pipeline 3. And we're also going to be talking to Danny Sheehan, Mark Sims, and several Native American elders, and all about weaving together the relationship between our galactic family, our First Nation family. It's going to be a really fascinating show, and I'm excited about it. So that's always at 6 o'clock Pacific time, so please join us. And then on Sunday, for my Sacred Sunday show, I just did an hour-long sit-down interview with Reverend Michael Beckwith, who's one of my absolute favorite human beings. And so it's a pre-recorded video, but my good friend TJ Woodward's going to join me live, and we're going to play the video with Michael, where he and I talk about addiction. Interesting, we kind of touched on it a little bit tonight, about what leads us to depression and mental health and addiction and recovery. And Michael has some beautiful things to say. And joining me and kind of commenting back and forth as we listen to what took place in my conversation with Michael is TJ Woodward, who has been my coach. He's a brilliant, brilliant man, a lot of fun. And he's the founder and CEO of Conscious Recovery, which combines raising our consciousness and our awareness with addiction and recovery. So that's going to be on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. Please do join us. All right, I am going back to gallery view one more time. Thank you, everybody who's been watching. And I recognize that the majority of people who watch this show watch our replay. So you can still put comments in Facebook. This will be posted on my wall. It's also going to be posted in Love Coach Academy. I do go back, I read the comments. If you really enjoyed the show tonight, share it out. Share it with your friends, your groups, your pages. Share it out, because I think it was a pretty dynamic conversation. Thank you, everyone, for watching, past, present, and future. Thank you, Bruce and Kamala Devi and Felipe, and thank you, my beloved teaching partner, Trish. And we'll look forward to seeing all of you again soon. Good night, everybody.